So, today we're going to be talking about the neuroscience backed facts that regard how narcissistic abuse in childhood shapes a person's sense of self and also alters their brain. And the reason I wanted to speak on this topic is because I believe that research can help those of us who resonate with the symptoms of narcissistic abuse at the hands of parents who showed high narcissistic traits, at the hands of parents who were emotionally dysregulated, emotionally immature, could not handle their emotions, and projected their shame, for instance, onto us as their children, parents who were shut down, parents who carried their own trauma, and parents who could have even lived vicariously through us and robbed us with a sense of identity. Understanding the science behind all of these factors, I believe, gives us the confidence to really appreciate and trust what we feel. Years ago, when I started this work, I was going by feelings. And if you know anything about growing up in a dysfunctional family, you're not allowed to have feelings. You're not allowed to express yourself. You have to pretend that you're okay, even when you're not. You have to pretend that you're happy, even when you are depressed and so sad. You have to smile, even though you are incredibly psychologically tormented, scrutinized, criticized, pushed away, gaslit, lied to. You have to pretend. So you can imagine before this day and age where we have research now in developmental neuroscience that helps those of us who, and particularly those in I would say my age category, I'm 60, those of us who, I would say 45 and up, we have been raised by people who have sometimes, if they're narcissistic, suggest that we're crazy, that we had it better than we actually did. We should just be grateful. We should not talk poorly about our parents. Even family and friends will judge us for any criticism that we have. And that's really a shame because it's prevented not just my generation of adult children, but all the generations before, including my own mother and father and grandparents, like where there's been this generational impact of suppressing one's truth and being psychologically conditioned to believe that anything that you feel that is negative is wrong. It should be denied. It should be something that you're ashamed of, which, in terms of healing, does more damage than anything. Because healing is all about acknowledging your pain, telling the truth. It's not even about fixing it, making it better. It's about learning to express it, learning to express your unhappiness, learning to go into the sadness of the lost childhood, giving ourselves permission to actually feel what we feel. And those of us who have picked up the codependent fleas along the way, the people pleasing fleas, the subjugation, the fawning, the rescuing, the fixing, then what we do is not only do we repress what we feel, what we do is we unconsciously, all outside of conscious awareness, we look to the outside for people to rescue us from this sadness. So it's very nuanced. And that's why I believe in systematic approaches to this in terms of really healing and recovering, because it does take a multi-layered approach, in my opinion. Because first we have to understand what went wrong. Then we have to understand what we're doing psychologically, below the veil, behaviorally, emotionally, even in the way that we speak, both in external speech and internal speech. We have to understand the inner consequences of narcissistic abuse by parents and how that affects the way we think on the inside and how it affects our relationships on the outside. And so not only do we grow feeling unworthy, we grow feeling ashamed that we feel unworthy. We grow ashamed of these feelings, and then we put an added layer on top of all of this where we slap on our lipstick, we go to work, we pay our taxes, we chase our dreams, we become perfectionistic, overwhelmed, we burn out, we never ask for help because we don't feel like we're worthy of help. And asking for help would be admitting a weakness or vulnerability, and vulnerability equals pain because as children, we weren't allowed to feel. So it's very nuanced. This is not something you don't heal from parental narcissistic abuse in 6 sessions with a coach or a therapist. This is a lifelong process of awareness, of looking within, of being patient with the self, and exploring the multidimensional ways in which growing up feeling very unsafe. And oftentimes, the first year of life is the most damaging. From 0 to 3 is the most brain development. From 0 to 7, you're in a theta brainwave state, which is a hypnotic brainwave state. So if your home was painful, your brain was wired for that experience, and your little ego, as it came online about 3 years old, decided that the world was an unsafe place, and you might need to dissociate or fawn or worry more about mommy's feelings than your own. You may have learned through experience that when you take care of mommy's feelings, even if that means don't burden her with your feelings, you experience less pain. This is neuroscience in action. And I have found in my own life, and it's taken me a long time to get to this place where I'm able to, from a very pragmatic plane of consciousness, look back on my life and see how all the puzzles, or all the pieces of the puzzle have fallen into place with me. From toxic sibling relationships, nonstop fighting, to being love addicted at 15, to imagining, going through suicidal thoughts at 12 and almost carrying that out, to being very needy with friendships, to pushing people away, to getting married at or engaged at 21, not really knowing what the heck I was doing, to idealizing men and idealizing situations and just jumping in without really thinking. I had no coping skills. I didn't know how to think, quitting nursing school, relying on a man to take care of me, thinking all I had to do was love him and take everything on, and certainly things would work out. To my surprise, when life hit me between the eyes with marriage, with motherhood, I had no coping skills. And then my body started to fail. And 3 children later, emotional breakdowns, mental breakdowns, physical breakdowns, spiritual breakdowns really led me to these breakthroughs where they were so painful because I had to understand how I got there. I had to understand what went wrong. Then I had to reparent myself. I had to rescue and resuscitate my inner child who was so full of shame. I had to go through that. And then I had to look at how all of these wounds, although not my fault, and it could have been no other way, this is generational stuff, this is DNA stuff, RNA stuff, This is not stuff that I asked for. It was stuff that I was born into and absorbed through spiritual, emotional, energetic osmosis, if you will. And my brain was affected. So there are neurological consequences too. There are cognitive behavioral consequences, again, none of which was my fault. And so looking over my life, then paying attention to how pain makes you very self absorbed and how emotional pain makes you very egocentric. And without coping skills, when you are an adult child, you're emotionally immature. I was emotionally immature. I became the most selfish during my breakdowns, just grasping at straws, and I'm not proud of that. And it's taken me, I would say that forgiveness is a key to salvation and to non-resistance. I would say even all these years later, the most challenging wound for me or resonance or experience within me that has challenged me the most is being able to forgive myself for how I hurt people as a result of being hurt, and particularly my children, and taking responsibility mentally and emotionally for how immature I was in that first marriage. Not taking anything away from him and how immature he was, but when I look over my life and I see all of this, I recognize now, because I've done so much work and I continue to work on myself, this is a lifelong process. And like I said, you have to go through all of these layers and move through all of these veils slowly, 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 slowly. And each new breakthrough builds off the last. And that gives you the strength, the sea legs, the emotional, I would say spiritual, cognitive, psychological, even neurological sea legs to get to another layer of self-awareness where you can step into the accountability of that, feel those emotions, forgive yourself, ask yourself for forgiveness, invite your higher self in to help you move through this stage so that you can continue to be your best self. And in this whole process, you are shifting at a neurological level. It's neuroplasticity in action. And so, what's helped me and what's helped all of my clients, because I rely on the neuroscience, I don't just make things up because it sounds spiritually woo woo. I back all my things up. I back all of my methods up. I back all of what I say up with neuroscience, with trauma informed research. And today I want to offer you, the adult child of a narcissistic parent, these insights because we carry so much shame because we don't want to feel this way about our parents. We are often judged by siblings who have a different experience of our parents. We are judged by neighbors. We are judged by even our spouses sometimes that don't get what we've been through. And I need to say this, the word narcissist is thrown around a lot, and that's a shame. But because that happens, that doesn't mean that we should stop talking about those legitimate experiences where we have been raised by narcissistic mothers and fathers. And if you are a truth seeker, if you resonate with the word cycle breaker, if you have found my work because you're interested in healing from codependency, exploring what it means to be the adult child of an alcoholic, then I'm so grateful that you're here. And this information regarding neuroscience to me is profound because it helps cut through that shame. It helps us stop needing other people to say, oh, yes, Lisa, like your mom was narcissistic towards you. You were her scapegoat. Your sister was the golden child. Yes, I see that. I don't need that anymore. There was a time where I thought I did, and that was a cognitive distortion. My third eye was blinded by trauma, but now I have a singular eye and I see things very clearly and I want to see things clearly. And if that means that I have to see myself in a way that's unflattering in order to get to the next level, yeah, I'm willing to do that. primarily because it feels so good to live that way with integrity. And I realize that if I can't live that way, how are my children going to live that way? How are my children ever going to have integrity and accountability? How are they ever going to be able to hold someone else accountable for integrity and accountability if their mother can't do it? If their mother's playing the victim, if their mother is blaming everybody else for how she feels or why she can't get to the next level. No way. And that comes from a healthy dose of reality and appreciation for my mortality. I will not always be here to pat my kids on the back, to powder their bottom, or to prop them up. They're going to need some organizing principles to rely on that will see them through any storm. And I would say that accountability, awareness, humility, and being willing to see things as they are, not as you want them to be, the ability to not sugarcoat who you think you are and to see yourself, because the first person we always see is the reflection of our ego anyway. You have to do quite a bit of recovery work and include spiritual work, in my humble opinion, in order to see yourself beyond ego identity and to be able to systematically within your own mind have that all make sense to you. Because the mind is like a Rubik's Cube. It gets moved around a lot. And the more you stick with this type of information, the more you never give up, eventually the Rubik Cube starts to make sense. There's orange, there's yellow, there's blue, there's red. Aha. And that's so much fun. And you can actually feel it clicking into place. And those of you who have followed my work and have worked with me in the past, you know what I mean. You know what I mean. So we're going to be talking about the neuroscience today. So here is a neuroscience-backed fact. So studies in developmental neuroscience, for example, in McEwen and Morrison, Nature Review Neuroscience, published in 2013, they show that chronic exposure to unpredictable stress, think about an emotionally unregulated parent, elevates cortisol and alters the structure of the amygdala, the hippocampus, and the prefrontal cortex. When a child grows up walking on eggshells, the amygdala becomes locked in hypervigilance, while the prefrontal cortex, the seat of rational thought and emotional regulation, underdevelops. So if you want to know why you're anxious and why you're nervous, this is why. Your prefrontal lobe is underdeveloped and the amygdala is overdeveloped. The result is that the child internalizes fear as part of their identity, equating safety with compliance and believing their worth depends on managing other people's moods. So that's the neuroscience that leads to codependency as the result of being raised by a narcissistic parent. Number two, mirror neurons encode the false identity. If you're fascinated with neuroscience, I would definitely look into mirror neurons. They are just absolutely fascinating. So here's the research. Mirror neuron research, for example, written by Rosaliti and Krugero, Annual Review of Neuroscience, published in 2004, reveals that children develop self-understanding by reflecting on their caregiver's emotional states. Okay, you know the phrase your eyes are the windows to your soul? Okay. When I was creating all of my courses, and this topic was so important to me to push forward in the eyes of the people that were following my work. Because what I learned was that when I looked into my mother's eyes, and this was all based on the neuroscience of mirror neurons, I saw disdain. I saw disgust. I saw aggravation. I saw, I don't love you. That's what I saw. I saw impatience. Now, we could argue that how would a 19-year-old mother, my mother was 19 when she had me, quit high school, married to my dad who was drinking and gambling at the time, very self-absorbed, not emotionally supportive whatsoever. How would a 19-year-old mother, and then this woman has me, and then within 3 years has 2 more children, what am I supposed to see reflected back at me when I look into that 23-year-old mother's eyes when I'm 3 years old and I need love, or I'm hungry, or I'm afraid, and she has no time for me between my father and my younger sister and brother? Of course, I'm going to see frustration and aggravation and leave me alone. You're 3. Your sister's just born. She needs me more than you do. I'm not arguing that. And I'm not even blaming my mother. I used to, and I had to blame her. In other words, I had to understand what went wrong and pin the tail on the donkey so that I could find the psychological space to basically find me, find me. And so when I was able to say, "Oh, mom, this is how my mom treated me. This is why I feel this way." This boundary that I was never allowed to have for a self began to form. And so the research is suggesting, don't look at why your mother looks at you this way. Just look at the mirror neuroscience, or the neuroscience of mirror neurons, to understand that this reveals how a mother's eyes, how a father's eyes, the children develop a self-understanding by reflecting the caregiver's emotional states. So how your mother treated you, how your father treated you, this is where self-understanding comes from. This is the neuroscience of self-understanding. So if you have a really crappy self-concept, this is why. It's neuroscience and it's not your fault. This is the impact. A narcissistic parent fails to attune, offering conditional approval instead of empathy. The child's mirror neuron system learns that love equals performance and emotional invisibility. Below the veil of consciousness, what will happen now is that your identity, your psychological identity, so understand that who you think you are on a psychological level is being wired through neuroscience because of the way that your parents are treating you or the way that you're perceiving it. You learn that love equals performance, that's codependency. If I can love you enough, you'll love me in return, and emotional invisibility. Codependency is about a relationship built for 2, but only one person serves the relationship. So you're invisible. Codependents don't know how they feel. They know how their partners feel. Or codependents know that they feel angry, sad, or frustrated, but they always suppress that in most cases until they hit a wall and it expresses in a very bad way. They're always worried about someone else's feelings. Now, the result is the nervous system encodes a false belief or a false self built on appeasement and self-erasure, while the authentic self is repressed to preserve attachment. So this is the neuroscience of narcissistic abuse that leads to codependency. Number 3, the default mode network becomes shame dominant. So here's the neuroscience. Neuroimaging studies, for example, Andrews Hanna, in his work Cerebral Cortex, published in 2014, shows that the default mode network, the network active during self-reflection, encodes autobiographical narratives. So if you're reading a script, dear one, here's the impact. Repeated invalidation and gaslighting wire shame and self-doubt into the default mode network. Even in moments of rest, the brain replays the message, I'm wrong, I'm too much, and I'm not enough. This is all my fault. Here's the result. Without conscious intervention, these loops perpetuate chronic self-criticism and prevent an integrated sense of self from forming. Unless you awaken and step out of the system and rewire it from outside of the system remains on this loop. So here's some healing insights that I want you to understand, because this is where the hope lies. Neuroplasticity means the brain can rewire through mindfulness, somatic regulation, and metacognitive journaling exercises and homeworks. By observing thoughts rather than fusing with them, stimulating vagal tone through breath work, and practicing self attunement, survivors begin to restore the neural pathways of self trust, inner safety, and authentic identity. This is so important to understand. So, we want to understand that mirror neurons will cause one to have a false self. You'll be wired for your false self if you experience chronic invalidation. You want to understand that chronic stress and survival wiring is the brain under siege, it's under chronic cortisol. We want to understand that default mode network is wired then for shame. And most importantly, we want to understand that healing the brain is you reclaiming the self. So the brain is plastic. Neuroplasticity means that your brain can change through conscious awareness. It can change through mindfulness and consistent new emotional experiences. So it's not enough, and I can tell you as someone who has run the gamut, it's not enough to listen to podcasts. It's not enough to watch a bunch of YouTube videos. And social media isn't going to heal you. You can be inspired by books. You can be inspired by thought leaders. But this doesn't change until you stop and you go into the silence within with practices that allow you to still yourself long enough where this type of work can really start to take root. So every time you pause before reacting, every time you observe a thought rather than identify with it, you're creating a new neural pathway. So, like I said, breath work, meditation, journaling practices, coaching programs that are grounded in metacognition help calm the amygdala and strengthen the prefrontal cortex, restoring balance between emotion and reason. This is why I've also relied on meditation, and I still meditate. As a matter of fact, I meditated already this morning, probably for close to 2 hours. People ask, like, how do you do that? Well, I get up really early. That's the only way my life works, and I don't complain about it. Instead, I practice the attitude of gratitude. I'm so thankful that I can get up early to fit in this personal development work and self-regulation work. I'm so grateful. So I really hope that this helps you, and I really hope that it cuts through the noise of childhood trauma, especially if you were raised by a narcissistic parent, because you're going to have a lot of guilt and shame around just admitting that to anybody. But it's time that you admit it to yourself, and it's time that we hang up the hat of needing other people to say, yes, this happened. Yes, you're worthy to check this out. Yes, your parents were abusive. Yes, we have to get past that and really just start to really work with ourselves and be true within our own self, because the truth sets you free. The truth sets you free. Rather than us trying to dance around how we feel, it's about learning to look within so much and with so much love and with so much grace and so much self-empathy that we give ourselves permission to experience these experiences that chronic invalidation taught us we had no right to experience, or we were wrong for feeling the way we did. It helps bring the prefrontal lobe back online. We can activate metacognition, we can benefit from neuroplasticity, and we can rewire the brain. And it's absolutely fantastic. I've done it, I teach it, I know it's possible. I hope this has been helpful. Namaste, everybody. Until next time. Hey, if you love this content, don't forget to check out the next video, and you can go to my website and take the codependency quiz.